So, in honor of our probably last game of the season coming up, I wanted to make a basic short video um, going over some of the things I think we could do to improve our execution on the court. So, hopefully this will give us uh, hopefully this will help. Some of this stuff is hard to explain during the games, and I think this cool diagram program might be helpful, so we will see. So the first thing we're going to go over is defense. If I have enough energy after this, I might do one of these on offense, but I think the defense is going to be the thing we can improve the most, the simplest. We do pretty good as it is. The last couple of games have been good, but we've had some breakdowns, and so I just wanted to go over a couple little things with our defense. So we play 2-3 zone for several reasons. We don't really have the athleticism at most positions to stay in front of defenders man-to-man. And so also we don't have the conditioning or the personnel to run up down the court, and the zone allows us to move less. So we've played it pretty much the entire time that we have played as a team, and so some of the guys are familiar with it. Some of the newer guys not as much. It's a lot more complicated than man-to-man defense, because with man you just have to worry about staying in front of your guy and not leaving him, whereas with the zone it's a little bit more mentally taxing because you got to make a lot of decisions on what you're doing. But if you know exactly what you're supposed to do and are waiting and prepared to do those things based on what's happening on the court, then it's not that difficult. So we'll go over some of these scenarios. So these are the basic positions in the zone, the 2-3. You have the two perimeter guards, 1 and 2, and then the two wings, 3 and 4, and the center, number 5. The basic responsibilities are straightforward. You have these 5 zones, which is where the defense gets its name from. There are a couple of overlaps, as you can see here, and there are some weak spots in the zone, which I will go over. So the two perimeter guards, they are responsible for the largest amount of area of the court, and will have to do the most moving. And while the zone is very dependent upon the rim protection and the rebounding of the wings and the center, the guards actually have a lot of responsibility, and it's very important that they have to do more, essentially. So as far as the wings and center go, the biggest thing is they need to communicate about what's going on. So if you have cutters coming in from the wings, they need to talk to each other so that you don't end up with open layups on the baseline. And if they're moving and they have people going into the low post, they have to communicate and go from there. It's also important to box out for rebounds from these positions. That is one of the weaknesses of the zone. It makes it harder to box out because you don't have a man that you're responsible for, so you just have to be aware who is in your area and try to not let them get offensive rebounds. All right, so as I mentioned, perimeter defense is extremely important, and it's a little bit more complicated than what the back line has to do. So we're only going to go through a couple of really basic things. If the offense does anything more complicated than what I'm going to show you today, we're probably in trouble anyway, but it's fine. Most of the teams we play against are pretty terrible also, so they're not doing anything complicated. There's no high screen and roll or anything weird like that. There's no complicated movements and off-ball screens going on in most cases. So you don't have to worry about anything like that. we do face a more complicated offense, we don't really need to worry about it because I wouldn't be able to explain how to react to it, and if I did, we probably couldn't execute anyway. So we'll just plan on continuing to do just the basic zone stuff that we always have done, and that should be fine. So as you can see, through the basic offense, you have the backcourt players bring the ball up, and then the front court players go towards their positions. So we're going to focus on the two guards here. They're at the front of the zone, and like I said, they have to do the most movement and have the most decision-making that they have to worry about. So in this case, you have the one this would traditionally be the point guard, who's bringing the ball up. Right, so as I said, the point guard has the ball here. And the two perimeter defenders on our team are essentially going to be sharing responsibility for the ball handler in this scenario. Nothing has happened yet. He's just brought the ball up, and there's nothing dangerous going on. The wings are getting a position. The offense center is coming down to the low post, and this is pretty normal. So there's a couple things to be aware of here. If the person with the ball right now is an extremely good three-point shooter, then you have to respect the shot and maybe step out beyond the three-point line to guard him so he's not just chucking up shots and undefended. Other than that, primarily we are guarding against the drive. The weaknesses of the zone, as I mentioned before, rebounding is one, and another big one is shooting, because it's difficult to pressure shooters. The 2-3 is just not designed to do that. So if the other team has good ball movement and good shooters, then they are just going to shoot a lot of threes and make a lot of them, and we're going to lose, which happens pretty frequently, but we just kind of have to live with that. Because usually the teams that do that, we can't really match up with in man-to-man anyway. So, all right, so everybody gets to their positions, and in this case, so our two perimeter defenders are still here guarding the ball, right? So there's no reason for them to be anywhere else in this scenario because they are just preparing for a drive from the point guard and trying to limit that. So what happens is he can go over here. In this case, the perimeter defender labeled 1 will follow him over to this side. The 2 will stay over here, and he will watch the passing lane here between the offense 1 and 2, but there's no reason for him to go and stand in front of the 2 because this guy doesn't have the ball, he's not dangerous, he's not doing anything. And this guy has to be prepared when the player with the ball comes back towards him so that the 1 and the 2 can hand off responsibility. And now on defense, these two guys have to communicate so that they can smoothly transition defensively between different players and do the more complicated things that we're about to see in a minute. So the 1 comes back over here. The defensive 1 stays on this side near the top of the key, and the 2 follows the ball. So that they seamlessly, ideally, transition defensive responsibility when that happens. All right, so now the defensive 2 is guarding the ball. He's actually got 2 players here he's responsible for. If you remember those zones that were drawn in the earlier diagram, this is all within his realm of responsibility. The wing down here doesn't need to be coming up quite yet because the 2 doesn't have the ball, so it's not that dangerous. Only one guy can have the ball at a time. So the defensive player can effectively guard both these guys if he's able to move quick enough and react properly. So in this case, you'll see the 1 passes the ball to the 2, and that's fine. The 2 then moves over because they're pretty close together, so this pass was not really that dangerous. And then the 1 would come over to guard the 1. Not too far because he still needs to be up here in case there's other movement. Somebody cuts up to the top of the key, or this guy cuts in and we'll go from there. But he does come a little bit closer over here, and that's fine. He could actually stay up near the top of the key in this case, as long as he has an eye on this guy and is able to react if the ball moves. So one big principle in the zone is moving as soon as the ball moves. So if you know where you're supposed to move, you can move there. As soon as you see which direction the ball is getting passed, you can move to the next spot. So like if we go back one, the 2's here. He knows if the ball goes over here, he's got to go and defend this guy. So as soon as this guy passes the ball, as soon as the ball leaves his hand, the defensive player moves. The ball will arrive there ideally not long before the defensive player gets there, and he can guard a potential shot. And if the ball goes down to the corner, that's fine. These guys just stay where they're at, and we can guard this player one-on-one. Now, there are some other options here when this happens. You can come down and trap, and then these players would come across here. And this is a good spot for a trap, especially if this guy is a weak ball handler, and especially if he's a weak passer, because he is forced to make a difficult passing decision here. He can pass it back to the 2, which is his safety valve. He can throw it down to the low post, which this is probably what he's wanting to do. But with 2 defenders on him, they might be able to trap him and either get a turnover or stagnate the offense a little bit. This pass over here is called a skip pass, going all the way across. This is very difficult to make, especially at our level. Most people are not doing this. If they do, the 5 and the 3 are here to jump the lane and potentially create a turnover. So best case scenario for the defense, this guy would attempt a skip pass, which would be crazy, and then we would get a turnover. But that's just one of the options we can do if we want to be more aggressive against a weak ball handler in the corner in this case. Or we could just guard him straight up, as I mentioned, and that's fine. If this is a good shooter or good ball handler, then we could do that. Or if these are good shooters, it's better to stay home on them. Now, if the ball does come down to the 5, the 4 can go back and forth here, double team the 5, especially if he's a very strong 5 and is dangerous in the low post, which we do run across people like that frequently. But he's in good position to double team here and then recover back to the wing if it gets passed out of the post. Now we're going to go over a specific set that the offense will run very often because they see that we're playing 2-3 zone. And this is a set that's designed to break the 2-3 zone and is difficult to defend. And we, in our last game, this happened a lot. So it happened. It's really dangerous when the offensive team has a big, a tall player who is a good passer or a good shooter. What they will do is they'll go from the normal set, and they will send a player to what is called the high post. It's going to be one of the corners of the key here, one side or the other of the free throw line. So the reason this is dangerous for the zone is this area is an area of common responsibility and or no responsibility. It is difficult to defend because if the 5 comes up to defend the high post, it leaves the low post exposed and the wings will come down, and so the defensive wings have responsibility there, and so you end up with the 5 on defense being responsible for rim protection, which is the paramount responsibility, but then also the high post danger here. So ideally you do not want your 5 to come up and defend this play. Sometimes that's necessary depending on how scrambled the rotations get, but that is bad. So instead what you want to happen is the 2 guards who are guarding the perimeter, again, they have to make decisions here, and it's a little bit difficult. Whichever side of the key the high post player is on, that perimeter defender needs to step back, which is not far, it's just a few steps back, into his body, deny him the ball. So you want to make it so that they do not want to try this pass. And sometimes this guy is just enormous and makes it extremely difficult to deny the ball, and in those cases we just have to live with that. But you got to try to deny the ball. And because if he gets the ball here, it's bad, and which I will show you in a minute. So if he's on this side, obviously the number 2 defender will deny. All you have to do is back into him, like I said, get into his body. Ideally, your back is touching his front, and your hands are up, and you're trying to make it a very difficult pass. And the wing has to come up and help in this case on the perimeter if there's a pass up here, because this is technically outside the 4's responsibility, but it's inside the 2's responsibility. But he is occupied in this case with denying the ball to the high post, which is very important. But you also can't give this guy an open 3, especially if he's a decent shooter. So the wing would come up and temporarily guard him. Then the 2 will come over and do what's called a bump. He will bump the wing back down to his area of responsibility, and the 1 on defense will come over and deny the high post. So that way we don't have an empty corner. This is something that doesn't happen very much with us because it's kind of difficult to do. It's a lot of movement, but we probably should do it every time. In some cases, especially if this guy is not a 3-point threat and this guy is not a 3-point threat, we could just stay in the previous position and we don't need to bump. But these 2 guys here need to make that determination on defense and communicate whether they are going to bump or not. It's usually the better play, but it does require more movement. So if the 2 thinks that he should bump because we've got a 3-point threat here, then he would call out to the wing player that he's going to bump him down, and we'll go from there. So, and then the 1 also needs to be aware of this so he can run over and deny, because this is an easy pass that you do not want to succeed. Sometimes it's going to happen, which is okay. Alright, so if the ball goes back, they have to rotate back as normal. We're still denying the high post. The 4 comes back up just in case he needs to help on the wing, and it's reset. The ball comes over here, there's no change, the wing comes up. Again, this is not his area of responsibility, but he has to help because the 1 is up here and doesn't need to be chasing the ball that far. Then normally what happens, the high post player will come over to the strong side, or the side that the ball is on, right? He'll change the side of the floor that he's on. In this case, the 2 can't really follow him over there because he's got responsibility over here, and it would scramble our rotations pretty badly. But this is terrible. You do not want this guy here with the ball and this guy here unguarded, because that's an easy pass, and then we lose. So what you do is the 2 does follow him, but he needs to communicate with the 1 here so that they can quickly bump, and the 3 will come back down to his responsibility, and then they will switch off if the ball goes back. The 1 will come over and deny, and the 2 will come back and guard the ball. So we'll go over that again because that's a little bit of a complicated movement. Back one more. Okay, so in this frame, the 2 is denying the 4. The ball has been passed. The 4 follows the ball to that side of the floor. The 2 has to follow him, even though that's not ideal, and he's on the wrong side now, and his area is completely unguarded, except for the wing who's coming up to help. So he has to follow him. The 1 bumps the 3, and all this requires communication. Then if the ball goes back, the 1 will bump the 2 who goes to guard the ball. And the reason that you do it like this is because the ball travels so much faster than a person that it's going to be difficult to have the 1 just chase this back and forth, and you don't want to do that. So you have to rotate. And it's a little bit more difficult to do these rotations with the bump and then the other bump, but it is better. It just requires communication, and everyone needs to know where they're supposed to go. And if you know you're supposed to go there, you can just move when the ball moves and go from there. In practice, it's not always that simple. They'll throw it back and forth. They'll fake a pass. This guy will be gigantic. There's all kinds of other complications. But this is the principle, and that's what we try to do. So the ball will come back over here sometimes. The wing has to come up and help again, and then we're back in the same situation we were. The 2 will bump the 4. The 1 will be in deny position at this point because the offensive 4 comes back. They will bump again just like on the other side, and we're back. So there's a couple of problems. If the high post entry pass is successful, like I said before, that's terrible. But we'll go over what happens in that case. So the guy gets the ball there. Either the deny didn't happen, or this guy is giant and is able to successfully catch the pass, or whatever. So he's got the ball here. If this happens, the zone is broken, right? Unless this guy is completely incompetent, the zone is broken. Because there's no effective way of defending him that will result in a bad shot most of the time. As you can see, he's in the middle of the responsibility area. These 2 guys are occupied defending here. They cannot defend this guy because he already has the ball, and they can't get around him to defend him. So we have to have another player come up. The 5 has to come up, which is, as I mentioned before, is bad. It opens up the rim here, and a dump off to the low post is extremely dangerous because that gives this guy an open layup. The 4 and the 3, the wings, they're on the outside of the 5. They can't come inside and defend him, so they have to come over as best they can and try to deny that low post entry pass. Now, if the 5 was actually not in the low post, if he was out here, the 4 could come down and guard him potentially, or if he's cutting across, he could bump him or whatever to slow him down, but typically it's going to be like this, and that's bad. And in this case, these guys have to communicate. They have to be aware of what's going on so they can prevent this high-low pass. This is the most dangerous thing, is the high-low pass, because it's basically a guaranteed layup, unguarded, and that's bad. There are some other options as well that make this a bad thing. You can see you can throw a good pass out there, and this wing is, if he is coming down to help deny the ball to the low post, then he's going to have a very difficult time getting out to the wing, and so it's going to be an open 3-point shot. The ball goes back. If the 5 comes over here, he's going to be denying it. The 4 can come over to protect the rim in this case. And go from there. So, as you can see, you want to prevent the 4 from getting the ball because he has so many options, and all the options are difficult to defend for the defensive team. That's why the deny is so important. And our last game, that happened a bunch of times. The high post player got the ball, and then it was just, we had a really hard time defending against that. So, the other problem with the zone, the 2-3, is we see this a lot, and it is not as bad as the high post entry, but it happens more frequently, and you can't really do anything to prevent it, and that's overloading. So what the offensive team will try to do is they'll try to overload one side of the court, because our 5 players all have positions defined symmetrically on the court. If they all move to one side on offense, then we've got guys that are not doing anything. So they move over to the side of the court. Everybody rotates. You've got a high post player here, but now you've got 2 players and the high post player and the corner wing, all potentially in strong positions. And you've got our wing over here literally unable to do anything effective. So if this happens, everyone has to communicate and figure out where they're going to move to. Usually the 4 will come over here. He will defend the high post if that entry pass is successful. He'll also help on any drives, and it basically rotates the court You can think of it as like it's rotated the court so that this is now the top of the key, and then the 4 would then be the backline defender, but the goal is still here, so it's not as ideal. But yeah, like I said, you see that happen a lot. And a lot of times they'll get a reasonably open shot, and everybody has to move with the ball, and then bump, and then go from there. Let me go back. I'll show you that. So there is some bad danger. Like if you get in this position, which this is where we want to be, right? This is everybody's done what they're supposed to do, but then you have a cut. So the high post player is being denied, but then he cuts into this open area that's been created because the zone has been kind of rotated by this overload, and so he gets a cut. The 4 can't really come all the way over here because then he'd be on the opposite side of the court, and then it would cause a bad back rotation. And so he cuts here with the ball. He then gets either an open shot, or the 4 has to come over, or the 5 has to come up, and that can cause other complications. Usually this cut is quick, and then that pass is quick, and he gets an open shot, or the 5 runs up and he dumps it off to the 5, and that's bad. If they've got it in the corner, that's not as dangerous. Oh, I think I didn't draw any more after that. So anyway, those are the 2 major problems, is the high post and the overload. Also, generally, if the opposing players are very good three-point shooters and they can shoot several steps back from the line, the zone is almost useless. But basically, we just kind of have to hope we don't run into teams like that because we're going to lose. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. If not, you can just ignore all of it. But let me know if you have any questions, and we'll go from there.